In a storm in the North Atlantic, a heavy British military frigate, the HMS Falmouth, deliberately rams a tiny Icelandic Coast Guard vessel. The Falmouth displaces over 2,000 tons and is armed with advanced artillery. The tier belongs to an island nation of barely 200,000 people, with no army. The strangest part of this encounter is that Great Britain and Iceland are not enemies. They are NATO allies, actively pledged to defend each other from the Soviet Union. Yet here they are, tearing each other apart in the freezing ocean over fishing rights. A localized dispute over cod escalated until it threatened to fracture the entire Western alliance. And against all mathematical odds, the underdog won. For 500 years, British fishermen sailed north to cast their nets. Look at this harbor. These ships are packed shoulder to shoulder. Working-class communities across northern England relied entirely on the massive scale of this catch. Iceland, however, had recently gained full independence. The volcanic rock offered very little arable land, making seafood their single pillar of survival. Letting foreign fleets scrape their seabeds meant national starvation. So, Iceland drew a line in the water, declaring a 200 nautical mile exclusion zone around their shores. Britain responded to the eviction notice by sending a naval armada to protect its trawlers. There were simply not enough fish to sustain both nations' economies. With absolute ruin facing them, compromise was mathematically impossible. Facing the might of the Royal Navy, the Icelandic Coast Guard knew a direct firefight was suicide. Instead, they relied on their superior speed and knowledge of the treacherous coastal geography to outmaneuver the British. This schematic shows their primary weapon. It's a net cutter, a heavy, four-pronged hook dragged on a wire behind the Coast Guard vessel. They designed it to attack British profits rather than British hulls. The Icelandic ship crosses behind the British trawler. The hook catches the steel cable towing the net, violently severing it. In an instant, thousands of pounds of fish and highly expensive gear sink straight to the bottom of the ocean. To stop the severing of their nets, the Royal Navy dispatched massive, heavily armed frigates like the HMS Scylla directly into the civilian fishing grounds. The conflict quickly devolved into heavily armed ships playing high-stakes bumper cars in freezing weather. These rammings caused millions of pounds in structural damage, and one collision resulted in the fatal electrocution of an Icelandic engineer. By refusing to fire a shot and focusing entirely on destroying the nets, Iceland shifted the rules of engagement. They made the physical act of catching a fish unsustainably expensive for the British. But cutting nets and trading paint at sea wouldn't force a superpower to surrender. Iceland needed leverage on the global stage. This map illustrates the GIU Paindaub, the stretch of ocean sitting exactly between Greenland, Iceland, and the United Kingdom. During the Cold War, this specific corridor was the most critical defensive choke point for the United States and NATO. Without radar and sonar stations monitoring this gap, Soviet nuclear submarines could easily slip undetected into the open Atlantic, directly threatening the American East Coast. Iceland's location made them essential to monitoring that gap. To force a resolution, they explicitly threatened to withdraw from NATO and expel the American military from the Keflavik Air Base if Britain didn't pull its navy out. By putting the primary Soviet containment strategy at risk, a nation with no army forced the United States to fight its diplomatic battle for it. By early 1976, the Royal Navy was at its breaking point. They had spent a massive chunk of their operating budget in the North Atlantic, and 22 of their frigates needed severe structural repairs from the constant rammings. Simultaneously, an ultimatum arrived from Washington. Fearing the collapse of the Western Alliance's northern defense line, American diplomats made it clear that the fishing dispute had to end. Britain was trapped. Continuing to fight for the cod meant jeopardizing the entire Cold War strategy against the Soviets. Under immense pressure from its closest allies, the British government finally capitulated. They formally recognized Iceland's 200 nautical mile exclusion zone and pulled their fleets back. The domestic cost of that surrender was absolute. Idle trawlers piled into harbors, strung with banners pleading to save Britain's fish, as the historic northern ports collapsed almost overnight. Thousands of highly skilled fishermen were permanently locked out of the waters their families had worked for generations. Massive fish processing plants shuttered, triggering widespread unemployment. While Iceland won a bloodless victory through strategic leverage, the cost of that win was felt most acutely by the British working class. For centuries, naval powers operated under the doctrine of the open seas, meaning whoever had the biggest ships could harvest whatever they wanted. Iceland dismantled that doctrine. Look at this map showing the modern exclusive economic zone. Every coastal nation now holds the sole right to the resources within 200 miles of its shores. Ironically, Britain immediately adopted the exact same 200-mile limit to protect its remaining waters, a practice soon codified globally by the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. A local fight over fish ended up drawing invisible economic borders across the entire planet. Through direct geographic leverage, a tiny island nation dictated who controls the wealth beneath the waves today.